The summer sun beat down on us as we loaded our bags into the SUV, ready for our long-awaited family trip. Richard, my husband of 35 years, barked orders like a drill sergeant. "Joanna, make sure you pack the cooler with enough drinks and snacks for the drive, and don't forget the maps and directions." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to remind him that I'd been planning this trip for months. As usual, he assumed I'd handle all the logistics while he reaped the rewards. Sylvia, Richard's mother, emerged from the house, her face pinched in disapproval. "Are we ready to go yet? You know how I hate waiting." I forced a smile. "Just about. Michael and Rebecca should be here any minute." As if on cue, my son and daughter-in-law pulled into the driveway. Michael gave me a sympathetic look, well aware of the tension between his father and me. We piled into the SUV, and I settled into the passenger seat, ready for the long drive ahead. But as we merged onto the highway, I overheard a hushed conversation from the back. "Once we're settled at the cabin, we'll have that talk with Joanna," Sylvia murmured to Richard. My heart sank. Talk? What were they planning? Richard's voice was low, but I caught the gist. "It's for the best, Mother. She'll never see it coming." "See what coming?" A knot formed in my stomach as I realized they were conspiring against me on what was supposed to be a joyful family vacation. The drive passed in tense silence, punctuated only by Sylvia's occasional snide remarks. By the time we reached the cabin, my nerves were frayed. As we unloaded our bags, Richard pulled me aside. "Joanna, we need to talk." I steeled myself, determined not to show weakness. "About what?" He glanced around, his expression guarded. "Not here. Let's go for a walk." We strolled along a nearby trail, the evening shadows lengthening around us. Finally, Richard spoke. "Mother and I have been discussing our living situation. With her health declining, she needs more care than I can provide on my own." I nodded, unsure where this was leading. "We've decided it would be best if she moved in with us permanently. That way, you can take care of her needs." My jaw dropped. "You expect me to become a full-time caregiver for your mother, without even consulting me?" Richard's eyes hardened. "It's the logical solution. You're retired and I'm still working. Who else is going to do it?" I shook my head in disbelief. "And what about my needs, Richard? Don't those matter at all?" He scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. This is what families do. We take care of each other." But his words rang hollow. In that moment, I realized our marriage had become a sham, a facade of obligation rather than love or respect. As we returned to the cabin, Sylvia greeted us with a smug smile. She knew exactly what was happening, and she relished her victory. That night, as I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, my mind raced. How had I let things spiral so far out of control? When had I stopped being Richard's partner and become little more than a servant? I thought of the dreams I'd once had, traveling, pursuing hobbies, enjoying my retirement. All of it had been sacrificed on the altar of duty and obligation. But as the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, a newfound determination took root within me. I would no longer be a passive bystander in my own life. It was time to take a stand. The cabin's rustic charm did little to soothe my frayed nerves as we settled in for the night. Richard and Sylvia acted as if nothing was amiss, chatting amiably about the scenic views and plans for hiking the next day. Their nonchalance only fueled my growing sense of unease. After dinner, I excused myself and retreated to the bedroom I was sharing with Richard. Closing the door behind me, I sank onto the edge of the bed, my mind racing. What were they plotting against me? And why? Memories flooded back. The countless times I'd put my own dreams on hold to cater to Richard's needs, the way Sylvia had always treated me like an intruder in her precious son's life. Had I been so blinded by a misguided sense of duty that I'd missed the cracks in our family's foundation? A muffled voice from the living room snapped me out of my reverie. I strained to listen, recognizing Richard's hushed tones. "Can't go on like this, Mother. She's become a burden." My heart pounded in my ears as Sylvia's raspy voice responded. "I told you she was never good enough for my son. We need to take action before it's too late." Take action? A chill ran down my spine. Were they planning to get rid of me somehow? I crept closer to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Their voices grew clearer, the words like knives twisting in my gut. "We'll have to be discreet," Richard murmured. "Michael can never find out the truth." My son's name sent a jolt through me. They were going to lie to him, to turn him against me. Tears stung my eyes as I realized the depth of their betrayal. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in shock and disbelief. When Richard finally entered the bedroom, his expression was carefully neutral. "You should get some rest," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Big day tomorrow." I watched him disappear into the bathroom, my mind whirling. I couldn't confront him, not yet. Not until I had a plan. That night, as Richard's soft snores filled the room, I lay awake, plotting my next move. I would not go down without a fight. These people who claimed to be my family had shown their true colors, and it was time I did the same. As the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, I felt a newfound sense of determination. No more playing the dutiful wife and mother. From now on, I would be the master of my own destiny. Over breakfast, I studied Richard and Sylvia, watching for any hint of their sinister intentions. But they maintained their facade of normalcy, discussing the day's activities as if nothing were amiss. "I thought we could go for a hike this morning," Richard suggested, his tone deceptively casual. "Get some fresh air before the heat sets in." I forced a smile, playing along for now. "Sounds lovely." As we set off into the woods, I hung back, allowing Richard and Sylvia to take the lead. Michael and Rebecca trailed behind, their hushed conversation a comforting backdrop. Sylvia's voice carried back to me, sharp and condescending. "Honestly, Richard, I don't know how you put up with her. She's dead weight, dragging you down." My fists clenched at her cruel words, but I remained silent, biding my time. Richard's response was muffled, but I caught the gist. "Don't worry, Mother. Soon she'll be out of our lives for good." A wave of anger washed over me, hot and consuming. How dare they? After everything I'd sacrificed, this was how they repaid me. In that moment, a plan began to take shape in my mind. A plan for revenge, for justice. They thought they could cast me aside like an unwanted burden? Well, they had another thing coming. As we reached a scenic overlook, I hung back, allowing the others to admire the view. While their backs were turned, I slipped away, retracing our steps back toward the cabin. It was time to take control of my life, once and for all. I watched Richard and Sylvia disappear down the hiking trail, their voices fading into the distance. As soon as they were out of sight, I sprang into action, hurrying back to the cabin. My heart pounded as I slipped inside, scanning the living area for any sign of their belongings. A leather briefcase sat on the coffee table, and I recognized it as Richard's. Without hesitation, I unzipped it, rifling through the contents. Financial statements, legal documents, and letters. My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded one, the looping handwriting unmistakably feminine. The words leapt off the page, searing into my brain. "My dearest Richard, our stolen moments together are all that sustain me." I stumbled back, the room spinning around me. An affair? After all these years of loyalty and sacrifice, he'd been unfaithful? Bile rose in my throat as I continued reading, the sordid details laying bare the depth of his betrayal. And there were more letters, each one more damning than the last. Tears blurred my vision as I turned to the financial records, my hands trembling. Line after line of unexplained expenditures and hidden accounts, proof that Richard had been bleeding our savings dry right under my nose. The sound of laughter drifted in from outside, and I froze, panic gripping me. Michael and Rebecca must have returned from the hike. I had to act fast. Snatching up the incriminating evidence, I raced to the bedroom and began stuffing my belongings into a suitcase. My mind raced, formulating a plan. I couldn't confront Richard and Sylvia here, not with Michael caught in the crossfire. No, I needed to get away, to gather my strength and decide my next move. As I zipped up the suitcase, a familiar voice called out from the living room. "Mom, are you in here?" "Michael?" My heart clenched at the concern in his tone. He deserved to know the truth, but not yet. Not until I was ready to face the fallout. "I'm just resting, honey," I called back, willing my voice to remain steady. "I'll be out in a bit." Silence, then the murmur of Rebecca's soothing tones as she ushered him away. Bless that girl for her intuition. With shaking hands, I scribbled a hasty note, tucking it into Richard's briefcase along with the damning evidence. Then, gripping my suitcase tightly, I slipped out the back door and into the waiting rental car. As I peeled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Michael and Rebecca on the porch, their expressions puzzled. A pang of guilt twisted in my gut, but I pushed it aside. They would understand in time. For now, I had a mission: to gather the strength and resources I'd need to bring my husband and his vile mother to their knees. They thought they could discard me like a worn-out rag? Well, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The miles stretched out before me, and with each one I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. No more playing the dutiful wife, the obedient daughter-in-law. From this moment on, I would be the master of my own destiny. And Richard and Sylvia? They were going to pay for every single slight, every betrayal, every ounce of disrespect they'd heaped upon me over the years. I would see to that, no matter what it took. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I allowed a grim smile to crease my lips. The game was on, and they had no idea what was coming for them. I drove in a daze, the miles blurring together as I put distance between myself and that wretched cabin. My hands shook on the steering wheel, a potent mix of anger and adrenaline coursing through my veins. How could he? How could Richard betray me like this after everything we'd been through? The letters burned in my mind, their sordid details searing into my brain like acid. And Sylvia, that vile woman, had been in on it the whole time, no doubt reveling in my humiliation. Well, they were going to regret the day they ever crossed me. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I pulled into a nondescript motel, my body thrumming with nervous energy. I needed to regroup, to formulate a plan for my next move. The dingy room did little to calm my frayed nerves, but I forced myself to take deep breaths, willing my racing heart to slow. Sinking onto the sagging mattress, I reached for my phone with trembling fingers. Richard's number glared back at me from the screen, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Oh, how the tables had turned. No more would I be the obedient little wife scurrying to answer his every beck and call. This time, he would be the one squirming, forced to face the consequences of his actions. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Just as I was about to hang up, his gruff voice crackled over the line. "Joanna, where the hell are you? Your son is worried sick." I bristled at his tone, that familiar mix of condescension and entitlement. Not anymore. "Save it, Richard," I spat. "I know everything. About the affairs, the money you've been siphoning off. I have proof." Silence, thick and heavy, stretched between us. Then a low chuckle that sent ice shooting through my veins. "So what?" he sneered. "You really think anyone will believe the ramblings of a bitter, delusional old woman?" White-hot rage licked at my insides, but I forced myself to remain calm, to keep my voice level. "I'm not the one who's delusional, Richard. You and your mother have been playing me for a fool for far too long. Well, those days are over." Another pause, and when he spoke again, his words were laced with venom. "You ungrateful bitch, after everything I've done for you, for this family? You're going to regret this." A harsh laugh burst from my lips. "No, Richard, you're the one who's going to regret it. Every single lie, every betrayal, every ounce of disrespect you've heaped upon me, you're going to pay for it all. I promise you that." His response was a torrent of profanity and vitriol, but I barely heard it. A sense of grim determination had settled over me, hardening my resolve. "Don't bother coming after me," I warned, cutting off his tirade. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your distance from our son. This is just the beginning, Richard. The gloves are off now." With that, I ended the call, a strange sense of calm washing over me. For the first time in decades, I felt in control of my own destiny. Grabbing a pen and paper, I began to make a list: names, numbers, resources. I would need allies in the battle to come, people I could trust to have my back. Jane, my oldest and dearest friend, would be the first. She'd been urging me to leave Richard for years, and I knew she would be in my corner without question. Next, a lawyer, a shark in the courtroom who could help me navigate the legal quagmire that was sure to come. I had evidence of Richard's misdeeds, but I would need an expert to ensure it stuck. As the list grew, I felt a newfound sense of purpose taking root within me. No more would I be the downtrodden, disrespected wife. Richard and Sylvia had awoken a sleeping giant, and they were about to feel the full force of my wrath. A grim smile tugged at my lips as I made the final entry on the list. Michael. My son. My rock. The one person in that twisted family who had always had my back. It was time to bring him into the fold, to let him know that the games were over. Together, we would take down the Machiavellian forces that had been working to destroy us. And when the dust settled? Well, let's just say Richard and Sylvia would be the ones regretting the day they ever crossed Joanna Henderson. I pulled up to Michael and Rebecca's cozy bungalow, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. Would my son understand the agonizing decision I'd made, or would he side with his father, blinded by years of manipulation? Taking a deep breath, I gathered my things and made my way to the front door, my knuckles rapping against the weathered wood. Seconds ticked by like hours before Rebecca's smiling face appeared. "Joanna, we were so worried when you took off like that. Come in, come in." Her cheerful demeanor faltered as she took in my haggard appearance, the suitcase clutched in my white-knuckled grip. "Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Michael's concerned voice drifted in from the living room. "Mom, is that you?" He rounded the corner, and I saw the moment the truth dawned on him. The suitcase, my red-rimmed eyes, the grim set of my jaw. His expression shifted from confusion to dread. "What's going on? Where's Dad?" Rebecca laid a gentle hand on his arm, her gaze flicking between us. "Why don't we all sit down?" We settled onto the plush sofa, an oppressive silence hanging in the air. Michael's eyes bored into me, pleading for an explanation. Drawing a shaky breath, I began to speak, the words tumbling out in a torrent. "Your father, he's been unfaithful, Michael, for years, by the looks of it. And not just that, he's been bleeding our finances dry, funneling money into secret accounts." Michael's brow furrowed as he processed my words. "What? That can't be right. Dad would never." His voice trailed off as I pulled out the crumpled letters, the bank statements detailing the missing funds. Wordlessly, I handed them over, watching as his eyes scanned the damning evidence. "Oh, Mom." His shoulders slumped, and I saw the exact moment the truth hit him, like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away, straightening my spine. "That's not all, honey. Your grandmother was in on it. They were planning to force me out, to make me your father's full-time caregiver while he carried on with God knows who." Rebecca's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room as Michael digested this latest bombshell. His expression darkened, and I recognized the flicker of anger in his eyes. Anger on my behalf. "Those bastards," he muttered, his fists clenching. "How could they do this to you, to our family?" I reached out, covering his hand with mine. "It doesn't matter now. What's done is done. I've made my decision. I'm leaving your father. I can't live like that anymore, constantly disrespected and manipulated." A muscle ticked in Michael's jaw as he processed my words. I could see the war raging within him, the desire to support me, battling against years of ingrained loyalty to his father. Finally, he met my gaze, his eyes shining with a fierce determination that made my heart swell with pride. "You're right, Mom. This ends now. Dad and Grandma," he shook his head, jaw clenched. "They've gone too far this time. I'm with you, 100%. Whatever you need, I'm here." A weight lifted from my shoulders as Rebecca nodded her agreement, squeezing Michael's hand. In that moment, I knew everything would be okay. With my son and his wife in my corner, I could weather any storm Richard and Sylvia threw my way. Reaching out, I pulled Michael into a fierce embrace, blinking back grateful tears. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing me, for having my back." As I held my son close, I felt a newfound sense of strength coursing through me. The path ahead would be rocky, but I was no longer alone. With Michael and Rebecca by my side, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Richard and Sylvia had made a grave miscalculation. They had underestimated the bond between a mother and her child, and now they would pay the price for their betrayal. The war had begun, and I had no intention of losing. With Michael and Rebecca's unwavering support, I felt a newfound sense of strength and determination. It was time to reclaim my life, to shed the shackles of Richard and Sylvia's manipulation once and for all. The first order of business was finding a place of my own, a sanctuary where I could begin to heal and plan my next steps. Michael insisted on helping me search, and within a week, we'd found the perfect little apartment in a quiet neighborhood. As I unpacked my belongings, filling the bare shelves and walls with pieces of my life, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. This was my space, my refuge from the toxicity that had plagued me for far too long. Of course, Richard didn't take my departure lying down. He showed up at Michael's doorstep, red-faced and bellowing, demanding to know where I was. "She's your mother, for God's sake," he raged at Michael. "You're supposed to be loyal to your family, not that ungrateful harpy." But Michael stood firm, his jaw set in that stubborn line I knew so well. "Mom's the only family I need right now. You and Grandma have done enough damage." Richard's eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears turning in his mind, searching for a way to regain control. "Don't be so quick to judge, son. You haven't heard the full story." "I've heard enough," Michael shot back. "Mom showed me the letters, the bank statements. I know exactly what kind of man you are." For a moment, Richard faltered, his bravado slipping. Then his expression hardened, and he jabbed a finger in Michael's face. "Mark my words, you're going to regret this. When your mother's lies come crashing down around her, don't come crawling back to me." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving a ringing silence in his wake. Michael's shoulders slumped, and I could see the toll this was taking on him. Crossing the room, I pulled him into a fierce hug. "Thank you," I murmured. "Thank you for standing by me." He returned the embrace, his voice thick with emotion. "Always, Mom. I'm with you till the end." In the weeks that followed, I focused on settling into my new life, unpacking, decorating, exploring my neighborhood. With each passing day, I felt a little more like myself, the weight of Richard and Sylvia's toxicity slowly lifting from my shoulders. Of course, they didn't make it easy. Richard bombarded me with calls and texts, alternating between pleading for me to come home and hurling vicious insults. Sylvia was no better, leaving scathing voicemails that made my blood boil. But I stood firm, bolstered by Michael and Rebecca's constant support. I knew that if I wavered, even for a moment, Richard would seize the opportunity to reel me back in, and I refused to let that happen. Not after everything I'd been through. The final straw came a few months later when Michael called me in a panic. "Mom, you need to get over here. Dad's gone off the deep end." I raced over to find Richard ranting and raving on Michael's doorstep, his face contorted with rage. "You're making a huge mistake, siding with that lying witch," he spat as I approached. "She's poisoned you against your own family." Sylvia hovered nearby, wringing her hands and shooting me venomous glares. For once, I felt no fear, only a simmering anger at the way they continued to try and manipulate us. Planting myself in front of Richard, I met his glare head-on. "That's enough. You've had your chance to tell your side of the story, and Michael hasn't bought your lies. It's over, Richard. We're done." His face purpled with rage, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But Michael stepped forward, his broad frame imposing. "You heard her, Dad. It's time for you to leave, and if you can't respect our decisions, you're no longer welcome here." The fight seemed to go out of Richard all at once. His shoulders slumped, and he shot me one last withering glare. "Have it your way, but don't come crying to me when this all blows up in your face." As he and Sylvia retreated, I felt an immense sense of relief wash over me. That chapter of my life was finally closed, the shackles of their manipulation broken for good. Turning to Michael, I pulled him into a fierce hug, blinking back grateful tears. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." He held me close, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got nothing to thank me for, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." And in that moment, I knew it was true. Richard and Sylvia had done their damnedest to break me, but I had emerged from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever before. At long last, I was free. With Richard and Sylvia finally out of our lives, Michael, Rebecca, and I were able to find some semblance of peace. But I knew it wouldn't last, not with the way they had been carrying on. Sooner or later, they would try to reassert their twisted control over the family. My chance for closure came a few months later, when Emma's 85th birthday rolled around. Despite the strained relations, Sylvia still expected the entire clan to gather and celebrate. I could only imagine the venom she would spew if Michael and I failed to show. Part of me wanted to take the high road, to let the past be the past. But a larger part, the part that had endured decades of disrespect and manipulation, craved justice. This would be my opportunity to expose Richard and Sylvia's misdeeds before the entire family. So with Michael and Rebecca's support, I agreed to attend the party. As we made our way to Sylvia's sprawling estate, I could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick as soup. Emma greeted us at the door, her perpetual sneer firmly in place. Well, well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter-in-law, she sneered. I must say, you've got a nerve showing your face here after the way you've treated my sister. I opened my mouth to respond, but Michael beat me to it, his voice low and dangerous. That's enough, Aunt Emma. We're here to celebrate your birthday, not listen to your venom. Her eyes widened at his tone, but she stepped aside, allowing us to pass. The gathering was already in full swing, with clusters of well-heeled guests milling about, sipping cocktails and making polite small talk. Sylvia spotted us immediately, her face contorting into a rictus of rage. She started toward us, no doubt intending to unleash a torrent of abuse, but Richard caught her arm, whispering urgently in her ear. For a moment, I thought they might cause a scene right then and there. But Sylvia seemed to rein in her temper, shooting me a look of pure venom before plastering on a sickly sweet smile. "Joanna, darling, how lovely of you to join us," she simpered, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "And Michael, Rebecca, we're just delighted to have you here." The undercurrent of menace was palpable, but I refused to be cowed. Lifting my chin, I met her gaze head-on. "Thank you for the invitation, Sylvia. It's been too long since we've all gotten together as a family." Her eyes narrowed at my pointed emphasis on the word family, but she said nothing. Richard, however, couldn't resist taking a jab. "Yes, well, some of us have a rather skewed definition of what family means, don't we, dear?" The barb was clearly aimed at me, but I refused to rise to the bait. Instead, I excused myself, making my way toward the bar. If I was going to drop this bombshell, I needed a drink first. As the evening wore on, I bided my time, watching as Richard and Sylvia worked the room, schmoozing and preening like the arrogant snobs they were. Emma, too, held court from her throne-like chair, lording over the proceedings with her usual disdain. Finally, as the cake was being served, I saw my opportunity. Rising from my seat, I clinked my glass, calling for attention. "If I could have everyone's attention, please." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. Richard and Sylvia's expressions were guarded, but I could see the unease flickering in their eyes. Drawing a deep breath, I began to speak, my voice ringing out loud and clear. "I want to thank Emma for including me in this wonderful celebration. It's been far too long since we've all been together as a family." I paused, letting the weight of that word sink in. Sylvia's eyes narrowed, but I pressed on. "Of course, I use that term loosely, because while we may be bound by blood and marriage, the sad truth is that this family has been rotting from the inside for years." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd, and I saw Richard tense, his face flushing an angry crimson. But I was on a roll now, the words pouring forth in an unstoppable torrent. "You see, for decades I've endured the cruelty and manipulation of my dear husband and mother-in-law, the emotional abuse, the financial betrayals, the utter lack of respect for me as a human being." Gasps and scandalized whispers filled the air as I laid it all bare. The affairs, the hidden bank accounts, their plans to force me into indentured servitude as Richard's caregiver. By the time I finished, Sylvia's face was ashen, her carefully cultivated facade crumbling around her. Richard, too, looked shell-shocked, as if he couldn't quite believe I'd had the audacity to expose his sins before his entire social circle. For a long, charged moment, the room was utterly silent. Then, like a dam bursting, the outrage and condemnation came pouring forth. "How could you, Richard? Sylvia, you wretched woman! And to think we welcomed you into our homes!" The voices swirled around us, a cacophony of judgment and disdain. Sylvia shrank back, her eyes darting wildly, searching for an ally, a friendly face. But there were none. Even Emma had turned her back, her lips pursed in a thin, disapproving line. As the tumult raged on, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The shackles of shame and secrecy had finally been cast off, the truth laid bare for all to see. Crossing the room, I came to stand before Richard and Sylvia, looking them square in the eye. "It's over," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Your lies, your manipulations, they've all been exposed. You have no power over me or this family any longer." Sylvia opened her mouth, no doubt to hurl some scathing insult or empty threat. But the words seemed to die in her throat as she took in the scene around her, the accusatory glares, the whispers of disdain. In that moment, I saw the fight go out of her, that indomitable spirit finally broken. She was a fallen queen, her reign of terror at an end. Turning on my heel, I strode from the room, head held high, Michael and Rebecca at my side. As we emerged into the cool evening air, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. At long last, I was free of their toxic influence, their twisted games. And while the road ahead would be long, I knew that I would walk it with strength and dignity, unbowed and unbroken. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold, and oh, how sweet it tasted. In the aftermath of Emma's disastrous birthday party, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in decades, I was free from the constant weight of Richard and Sylvia's manipulation. Their toxic influence finally purged from my life. Of course, they didn't go quietly into that good night. Richard bombarded me with calls and emails, alternating between groveling pleas for forgiveness and vitriolic tirades against my supposed betrayal. Sylvia, too, made her fair share of attempts to reassert her control, leaving scathing voicemails that I promptly deleted without listening. But I was done engaging with their drama, their twisted mind games. I had laid bare the truth for all to see, and in doing so, I had regained my power, my sense of self-worth. With Michael and Rebecca's support, I focused on building a new life for myself, one free from the shackles of my past. I found a quaint little apartment in a charming neighborhood, filling it with pieces that brought me joy. Fresh flowers, cozy throws, framed photos of happier times. And as the weeks turned to months, I began to venture out, to rediscover the world beyond the confines of my toxic marriage. I joined a book club at the local library, losing myself in the stories of other resilient women who had faced and overcome their own struggles. I volunteered at a nearby soup kitchen, finding solace in the simple act of serving others. Slowly but surely, I began to heal, to reclaim the parts of myself that had been buried for far too long. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me gave way to a newfound sense of peace, of contentment. Of course, Michael and Rebecca were a constant source of strength and support throughout this journey. They insisted on regular family dinners, filling my little apartment with the sounds of laughter and love. And when Rebecca gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, I was there every step of the way, reveling in the joy of becoming a grandmother. As I cradled that tiny bundle in my arms, gazing into her innocent eyes, I made a silent vow. This child would never know the pain and manipulation that had plagued my own family. She would grow up surrounded by love and respect, her spirit nurtured and cherished. In those quiet moments, rocking my granddaughter to sleep, I found a sense of peace and purpose that had eluded me for far too long. This was what truly mattered, not the petty squabbles or toxic power plays, but the simple joys of family, of unconditional love. And if Richard and Sylvia ever dared to darken our doorstep again, to try and taint this newfound happiness with their venom, well, they would quickly learn that I was no longer the meek, downtrodden woman they had once taken such delight in tormenting. No, I was a phoenix risen from the ashes of my past, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And I would protect this fragile new life with every fiber of my being, come what may. As the years passed, Richard and Sylvia's attempts at contact grew fewer and farther between. Whether they had finally accepted defeat or simply moved on to tormenting some other poor soul, I neither knew nor cared. They were ghosts of my past, shadows that held no power over me any longer. My focus remained firmly on the present, on cherishing each precious moment with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my beautiful granddaughter. We became a tight-knit clan, bound not by blood or obligation, but by a deep, abiding love and respect. And in those quiet moments, as I watched my family blossom and thrive, I knew that I had won the ultimate victory. Not through rage or vengeance, but through the simple act of living my life on my own terms, unbowed and unbroken. Richard and Sylvia had tried their damnedest to crush my spirit, to strip me of my dignity and self-worth. But in the end, it was their hatred, their pettiness, that had withered and died like a noxious weed starved of sunlight. As for me, I had risen from the ashes, a towering lily in full bloom, my fragrance carrying on the wind as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And that, I knew, was the greatest revenge of all.